Chapter 5, Section 4, From Compromise to Crisis, 1857 to 1861. Like many slaves, Dred Scott and his wife Harriet wanted their freedom, but rather than run away, they tried to win it legally. In 1846, they sued for their freedom in a St. Louis, Missouri court. The Scotts had lived with their owner for several years in the free territory of Wisconsin. They based their suit on the argument that living in a free territory had made them free people. What began as a simple lawsuit led to one of the most notorious Supreme Court decisions in the history of the nation. The Dred Scott decision outrages the North. In 1856, the case of Scott v. Sanford reached the Supreme Court. The court, led by Chief Justice Roger Taney, faced several key questions. First, did slaves have the right to bring a case before the federal court? Second, did the Scotts stay in Wisconsin make them free? Taney, however, saw that in this case the opportunity to resolve the slavery issue once and for all. He asked the court to consider two additional questions. Did Congress have the power to make laws concerning slavery in the territories? If so, was the Missouri Compromise a constitutional use of that power? The court issued the Dred Scott decision in 1857. It began by reviewing the Declaration of Independence's words that all men are created equal. Writing for the majority, Taney said, "The general words seem to embrace the whole human family, but it is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included, and formed no part of the people who framed and adopted this declaration." Chief Justice Roger Taney, Scott v. Sanford, 1857. To this, Taney added, Dred Scott was not a citizen of Missouri within the meaning of the Constitution, and is not entitled as such to sue in its courts. The court also rejected the idea that Scott's stay in Wisconsin had made him a free man. Taney reasoned that giving Scott his freedom would be like taking property from his owner. The Fifth Amendment of the Constitution protects private property. Thus, the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional by establishing territories which prohibited a citizen from holding or owning property of this kind. The ruling struck the nation like a bombshell. Southerners were thrilled. They believed the court had settled the slavery question in their favor. Northerners were stunned. The court's decision had invalidated the whole idea of free soil and opened all territories to slavery. The decision, wrote a New York newspaper, is the moral assassination of a race and cannot be obeyed. John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry shocks the South. The Dred Scott decision helped convince radical abolitionists like John Brown that slavery would never be ended by legal means. In 1859, Brown decided to try a different approach. He provoked an armed uprising of slaves to free themselves. With 21 other men, Brown seized the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. An arsenal is a place where guns and ammunition are stored. Brown intended to distribute the weapons to slaves in the area and spark a slave revolt. Brown's plan was thwarted when federal troops stormed the arsenal and captured him and his men. Brown was tried for treason, convicted, and executed. Even so, John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry shocked the South and prompted widespread fears of a slave rebellion. Most Southerners saw Brown as a lunatic whose extreme views were representative of the anti-slavery movement. Many Northerners, on the other hand, saw Brown as a hero and a martyr to the cause of abolition. Poet and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson declared that Brown would make the gallows as glorious as a cross. When the Civil War began a few months later, Union troops marched into battle singing, "John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, his soul goes marching on." The election of 1860 splits the nation. The presidential election of 1860 drove a final wedge between the North and South. Sectional strains had split the Democratic Party into Northern and Southern factions, or competing groups. Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas of Illinois and backed popular sovereignty in the territories. Southern Democrats picked John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, who wanted slavery to be allowed in all territories. John Bell of Tennessee, who ran as a candidate of the Constitutional Union Party, tried to avoid the divisive issue of slavery. It was the fourth candidate, however, who polarized the nation. He was Abraham Lincoln, the Republican Party's nominee. Lincoln, an Illinois lawyer, was a moderate but firm opponent of slavery, who had first gained national attention during a run for the Senate in 1858. In a famous series of debates against his opponent, Stephen Douglas, Lincoln had condemned slavery as a moral, social, and political wrong. Lincoln lost the Senate race to Douglas, but his campaigns had won him strong anti-slavery support in the North. This support, as well as a split in the Democratic Party, helped sweep Lincoln to victory in 1860. Lincoln won the presidency with less than 40% of all the votes, all of them cast in the North. His name did not even appear on the ballot in many Southern states. Lincoln's victory raised a cry of secession, or withdrawal from the Union, in the South. Southerners feared that with a Republican in the White House, Congress would try to abolish slavery. Lincoln tried to calm Southern fears. He said he would not interfere with slavery in the South. He also said he would support the enforcement of the fugitive slave law. But he refused to support the extension of slavery to the Western territories. On that question, he said there would be no compromise. Secession spreads across the South. Lincoln tried to hold the nation together, but his efforts had little effect. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Over the next several weeks, 6 more Southern states pulled out. Together they formed the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as president. In his inaugural address, Lincoln declared that secession was both wrong and unconstitutional. He added that he had no legal right to interfere with slavery in the states where it existed, but he expressed his determination to keep the Union together. He appealed to the rebellious states to return. "In your hands, my fellow dissatisfied countrymen, and not in mine," he said, "is the momentous issue of civil war."